For mere seconds after the blade fell, and Boleyn's severed head may have retained consciousness, a horrifying coda to the life of the woman for whom Henry VIII shattered the Church of England. How did the queen he once tore a nation apart to possess end up on the executioner's block? London, May 19, 1536. The sun rose behind heavy grey clouds, casting a pale light over the Tower of London. The great stone fortress stood tall above the city, a symbol of both power and sorrow. In the courtyard, a scaffold had been built during the night, not the usual high platform used for executions, but a lower, quieter one. It was made for a special purpose, to fit the style of a foreign swordsman with a blade unlike any used in England. This was no ordinary execution. Soft whispers spread quickly through the morning air, passed between servants, guards, and anyone who dared speak. Today, something would happen that had never happened before in English history. For the first time, a queen, one crowned and honored, was going to die by the sword. Her name was Anne Boleyn. She had once captured the heart of King Henry VIII, turning his world upside down. For her, he had challenged the Pope, defied the Emperor, and risked the anger of his people. And wasn't just his love. She helped tear England away from the Catholic Church and start a new chapter in history, the English Reformation. But now, that same woman was no longer a queen. The law had declared her a traitor. Inside the cold walls of the tower, in a small room where she had spent the last 17 days, and woke to her final morning. The world outside waited, silent and still for what was to come. She was 35 years old. Though her crown had been taken and betrayal surrounded her, and Boleyn still carried the grace and elegance that had once charmed an entire royal court. On the morning of her execution, she rose with calm dignity. A few loyal ladies remained with her, helping her prepare for her final appearance. Every part of her outfit was chosen with care. She wore a dark gray cloak lined with fur, serious and respectful, matching the mood of the day. Underneath, she wore a deep red bodice. It wasn't for fashion. The color was chosen to hide the blood that would soon be spilled. It was not vanity. It was strength, a final act of courage in the face of death. As she dressed and showed no fear, instead, she made a quiet, chilling remark. "I hear the executioner is very good. I have a little neck." She touched her slender throat as she spoke. It was a moment remembered by those who watched, filled with dark humor and sharp wit. Even facing the end, she held her courage. She would die as she had lived, bold, proud, and unbroken. But how had it come to this? How had the woman who once held the heart of England's king now found herself kneeling before a foreign sword? And Boleyn's story didn't begin with a crown. It began with ambition. She was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a smart and rising diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard, who came from one of England's most powerful families. From a young age, and was surrounded by the beauty and brilliance of European courts. She was educated in the Netherlands and served at the French court of Queen Claude, where she learned the language, culture, and ideas of the Renaissance. When she returned to England around 1522, she didn't fit the typical image of beauty. She had olive-toned skin, long dark hair, and striking black eyes. Not the pale skin and golden hair that were popular in Tudor, England, but she had something even more powerful: intelligence, confidence, and charm. People couldn't help but notice her. She didn't need to speak to command her room. Soon she caught the eye of the most powerful man in the land, King Henry VIII. At the time, Henry was still married to Catherine of Aragon. Their marriage had failed to give him a son, and his frustration was growing. When he tried to make Anne his mistress, she refused. Her sister Mary Boleyn had already taken that path, and Anne would not follow. She reportedly told the king, "If you want my body, you must give me a crown." It was a bold demand, almost unthinkable. But Henry was obsessed. What followed was 7 years of pursuit and political chaos. Determined to make Anne his queen, Henry asked the Pope for a divorce. When the Pope refused, Henry broke from the Catholic Church. He created the Church of England and named himself its supreme head. This wasn't just about love. It was a political and religious earthquake that changed English history forever. In January 1533, Henry and Anne were secretly married. She was already pregnant and both hoped for a son. But in September, she gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. The king was deeply disappointed, still, and was crowned queen. Her coronation was grand, and for a while her position seemed secure. As queen, Anne was far from quiet. She supported religious reform, helped make the Bible available in English, and surrounded herself with smart, forward-thinking scholars. She believed in her role and her right to wear the crown. But her boldness made enemies. The old noble families looked down on her. Catholics blamed her for the break with Rome. Even in her own household there were spies and traitors. Her downfall didn't begin with scandal. It began with tragedy. After Elizabeth's birth, Anne became pregnant again. But in 1534, she suffered a miscarriage. The pressure to give Henry a son was crushing. His love for her began to fade. The court grew cold. In early 1536, Anne became pregnant once more. But again, she lost the baby, possibly after hearing the shocking news that Henry had been badly hurt in a jousting accident. Some said she believed the child, a boy, was lost because of the stress. It was a heartbreaking moment, both as a mother and as a queen. Not long after, her enemies acted quickly. Rumors spread: adultery, incest, treason. One by one, the men close to her were arrested, including her own brother, George Boleyn. The charges against Anne Boleyn were weak. The evidence was shaky. But in Tudor, England, truth didn't matter as much as how things looked. Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. Her trial became a public show, carefully staged to make sure she would be found guilty. She defended herself with calm and grace, pointing out the many holes in the accusations. But it didn't matter. The verdict was already decided. Guilty. Her sentence was death by beheading. Now, on this gray morning, that sentence was about to become real. The woman who had once worn the crown of England was about to kneel before the sword, not because she had failed, but because she had dared to succeed. She had reached for power, and for a time she had held it. King Henry's need for a male heir was more than personal. It was political. A son would protect the throne, the Tudor name, and the future of England. Without one, the very reason for his marriage to Anne began to fall apart. Henry's passion for Anne quickly turned cold. Disappointment grew into distance, and distance into disdain. She became more and more alone at court. The charm, cleverness, and courage that had once made her beloved now made others eager to see her fall. One of those people was Thomas Cromwell, the king's powerful advisor. Once Anne's ally in the Reformation, he now saw her as a threat. By April 1536, whispers of a plot turned into real action. With Henry's approval, or at least his silence, Cromwell launched an investigation into Anne's personal life. It was a plan not based on truth, but on rumors and lies. On May 2nd, Anne was arrested. She was charged with adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, George Boleyn, as well as planning the king's death and committing treason. The accusations were shocking, but also clearly false. Still, in Henry's court, truth had little power. What mattered was image, legacy, and removing a queen who no longer served the king's purpose. Anne's trial on May 15th was more performance than justice. She was given no lawyer, no chance to face her accusers. The jury was full of men who wanted her gone. But even then she stood strong. She answered every question with calm and intelligence. Even her enemies had to admit she was impressive. One observer said she spoke with such wisdom and grace. She seemed not like a woman, but something angelic. But none of it mattered. The result was already decided: guilty. At first, the sentence was to be death by burning, a horrific punishment. But in what some saw as mercy, and others as a political move to make things look better, Henry changed it to beheading. He even sent for a skilled swordsman from France known for quick, clean executions. A small comfort perhaps, but still cold. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne woke, knowing the end had come. She had been told the execution would take place at 8 a.m. She prayed, took communion, and prepared herself with quiet strength. But then, just as she was ready, the execution was delayed until noon. The wait was cruel. The extra hours dragged on. Alone in her chamber, and sat with her thoughts, her fears, and her prayers. She whispered over and over, "Lord, have mercy on me." She swore on the sacred host that she had never betrayed the king. "For my salvation," she said, "I am innocent of the things for which I was condemned." Those who were there later spoke of how calm she was in those final hours. It wasn't just peace. It was dignity, and would not let her enemies steal her courage. As the hour neared, the sound of drums echoed through the air. It was the signal to the crowd. The execution was near, and said her final goodbyes to her ladies in waiting. To each she gave a small gift: a prayer book, a piece of jewelry, a handkerchief. Ordinary items now filled with deep meaning. "Remember me and how I end," she said gently. It wasn't a cry for pity. It was a quiet request to be remembered, not as a fallen queen, but as a woman of strength. She was then led to the scaffold. About 1,000 people were there, not as many as expected. The mood was not loud or wild. It was strangely quiet, almost sad. Many took off their hats as and walked past, a sign of respect. She wore a simple dress of gray and crimson. She walked with calm and pride. The fire in her spirit, the one that had once won over a king, still burned in her final steps. Once on the scaffold, Anne was allowed to speak. The wind was cold. The sky above was still gray. She stood tall, her hands folded, her eyes clear. The hush in the air was heavy. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. She was offered a final word, a last chance to speak before the sword fell, and did not plead. She did not blame. Instead, she spoke with grace, not to clear her name, but to meet death with dignity. "Good Christian people," she said, her voice calm and steady, "I am come hither to die according to the law, and by the law I am judged to die. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you. For never prince had a more gentle nor more loving subject than I have been." She did not confess to the crimes because she knew they were false. She did not beg for mercy because none was coming. Instead, she offered forgiveness even to the man who had betrayed her. Then quietly, she knelt on the straw. She removed her headdress. One of her ladies stepped forward to tie a blindfold over her eyes, and reached up once to adjust it herself, then folded her hands again. She knelt still, waiting, her back straight, her neck long. The French executioner, dressed in black, stood silently beside her. In his hand was a sword, not an axe, as was common in England, but a sharper, swifter blade. He moved quietly. No drum roll, no announcement, just a whisper of motion. To distract her, he softly called to his assistant for the sword, and turned her head slightly, just a fraction. And in that instant it was done. One swift strike. No scream, no struggle, only silence. And Boleyn, Queen of England, mother of the woman who had changed the face of history, was dead. The crowd stood frozen. Some wept, others crossed themselves. Even those who had once wished her gone now felt the weight of what had just happened. Her body was placed in a simple arrow chest, the kind used for storing weapons. No coffin, no ceremony. She was buried in the chapel within the Tower of London, beneath the cold stone she had once walked as queen. But Anne's story did not end there. Though her body was laid low, her legacy rose higher than even her enemies could imagine. The daughter she left behind, Elizabeth, would grow up to become one of the greatest monarchs in history, a queen who ruled for 45 years and brought about England's golden age, and had lost her life but not her purpose. She had dared to rise in a world that wanted women to remain quiet. She had spoken when others stayed silent. She had fought for love, for power, for belief. And though she paid the highest price, she helped reshape a kingdom. Today, nearly 5 centuries later, her name is still spoken. Not just as a tragic figure, but as a woman who lived and died with courage. She was silenced, but never forgotten. She knelt to the sword but stood tall in history. And Boleyn, queen, mother, rebel, martyr. A life that ended in shadow but cast a light that still shines.